Welcome back. Today's the second session of quilting that you all joined me with, and it was last week. And during that session, Susan, would you help me pass these out? During you all met each other, you all indicated why you were coming to the class, and during the class you showed an awful lot of excitement. As a matter of fact, one of the things that Chris did when we talked about the history of quilting, it dates back into Asia. Some of the early quilts came from Asia, made their way across to Europe. And in doing it, what Chris found out was the Crusaders, they used quilts under their armor. He got that idea. And that was one of the reasons why Chris came to the class. So not only did we talk about last week the history, we talked about reasons why people quilt. We also talked about themes, and lastly about different quilts. So what you're doing today in the class is we're going to get together and we're going to be talking about what you want to do, what theme you want to use, how you want to do it, whether you want to design your own quilt, whether you want to cut it, whether you want to buy a pre-cut quilt, whether you want a machine quilt, or whether you want to do it by hand. Some of you may have, as I mentioned, had the opportunity to go to a quilt show or to a store, others maybe not. So I did bring some books for you to look at, as well as some quilts. So please be careful as you put them out on the table, because there's some things that you may want to look at. Here's a quilt that recently came out. You may want to pass this around. It actually took this woman 1,000 hours to do that particular quilt. Then, as you're making your decision, we're going to go around the room and you're going to tell me, and I'm going to put on the board what you want to do. Here's a book about machine quilting. Here's another one about Texas quilts. And a matter of fact, this one we're doing right now for a young girl who's making her communion that we should have ready for in a couple of weeks, the design here. Okay? This particular quilt that you might get interested in was done actually in Texas. People were in class. They all were part of the club. They all did a square. It's all dated and named. This particular quilt is hand quilted. Okay? So I'm not sure with the table whether you'll be able to get that around. You also, as I mentioned to you, have the opportunity of doing two things. You can buy pre-cut fabric. Makes life easier. Here's one particular quilt that's being done for my son. And then here is another one on a star. So two more things you can look at as you're making your decision. But what I want to do, rather than eat up too much of the time, I want to go around the table and talk at the moment, since you did all of this prep work, as to some of your thoughts. Chris, as I mentioned, he's already told me what type of quilt he's doing. And remember, the art. Think of the angles that you have to do. Think of the math that goes into it. Not only that, you've got to be able to think of your ability, your timing, whether you want to do it by hand. It's going to take a lot longer. Your sewing machine. How expensive do you want to go? Do you have a basic machine? Or do you have a machine that you have to get what's called a foot to be able to quilt properly and adjust the curved machine you have? So why don't we start? Susan, you've given some thought about the quilting since the last class. What's your ideas on what you want to quilt?
I would like to use a machine with pre-cut fabric.
Okay. Any particular design?
Just one that has a lot of color to it.
Color. Okay. Great. And who do you want to do it for?
My son.
Good.
Or sons.
Denise,
Stephen.
some of your thoughts.
So I'm thinking, I saw this wonderful one that had this wonderful rounded pattern with other pieces in it, and it looked like it was kind of something that you were going to have to really work at, and I would like to try that one.
Okay, good. See, here's another book you can take a look at with regard to stripping and how you want to do the strips of the quilt. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes?
Stephen, was this one that I'm, this sample, was this done on a machine or by hand?
It was all by hand.
This is all by hand?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And those are all the blocks that you see in there, all individual blocks. It was a raffle. And the person actually won the raffle, then had to put the quilt together to show the rest of the quilt club.
And how much time does something like that take?
It takes hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, no,
and really, when you think about it, in the history that we talked about last week, in the early days, what you would find is you wouldn't get people who'd get the pre-cut. What they would do, or even buy fabric, it was pieces of material that you had at home. Okay?
Yes, right.
And in the Crusades, they actually used horsehair. Yes,
Just-
Peter.
You know, I missed last week's class.
Right.
But, and we were talking about, I'm the newbie. Would you recommend, what's the simplest, if I'm the first guy quilt thing?
You know what? It's changed dramatically. In the 70s and 80s, you aren't considered a quilter unless you did it by hand. Now there's more and more men that are doing it. I would recommend if you have the money, you get a better machine. And I think that, we could spend a little bit more time after class and you get it down like that.
Excellent.
You were a carpenter, so it's going to come easy.
Excellent. Good.
Class is going to be concluding pretty quickly because I apologize we didn't get to everybody, but I know you have all great ideas. You did your homework. One of the other things for next week, what I want you to do is I want you to come back and I want you to have already started the thought process and doing some of the pre-cuts. If you do the pre-cuts, as I said, it's easier. But if you buy the fabric, you cut it yourself, it's going to be something like this. Then when you put it together, this is what you're going to see happen. You're going to take all the various pieces, all of these are different fabrics. Then you're going to cut them and you're going to start to stitch them. That's the first start. And as you all know, what's going to happen is you're going to put them together. That's going to be on the top, then you're going to have the batting, and then you're going to have the undercover. Okay? That's next week's homework, so make sure you come next week with that ready to go.